In Taiwan, they create a festival, a street festival for a dead person, complete with exotic dancers and strippers. Now, probably many people would want to go to a funeral in Taiwan much more than in any other culture. But if you go to the Arab culture, for instance, what you have is almost very close to what we find in the Bible. You know, there is much wailing and gnashing of the teeth. You come to America, you find a very, in Protestant America, there is a kind of a stoic approach to death. That is, you are supposed to hold it together. You're supposed to not express your emotions, which is completely opposite to the culture from which I come. You're actually, in my culture, you're supposed to exaggerate your emotions, show off how much you are mourning, get it off your chest. Whereas I was very shocked when I went to the first funeral in the United States. And I found that people are supposed to kind of keep it very much together, and they are supposed not to show emotion. If they are going to cry, they will actually go and hide. They don't, you know, make a show of crying. And this is obviously a vestige of the ascetic Protestant religion that has really vanished in America. But this asceticism, this stoicism vis-a-vis death remains in our culture almost as a ghost of religious beliefs that we used to have. So what we have in these three cultures, the Arab cultures, Taiwanese culture, and the American culture, very, very different approaches to this rite of passage. What's important, but the common denominator is that they are all rites of passage. They're all aimed to kind of routinize death and reconcile us to the fact that we live in a cosmos, in a meaningful universe. It is not meaningless. It is not chaotic. So rituals of death kind of make the unponderable, the unimaginable part of the routine ways of social life, and that is their function. In some cultures, for instance, in the Greek culture, the worst thing that could happen to a corpse is for it to remain exposed and be devoured by birds of prey. We see in Homer that, for instance, Hector is terrified that he will be left outside and be devoured by beasts and by birds of prey. Now, the exact opposite of that obtains in the Persian culture, which was, you know, the rival of the ancient Greeks. They considered earth, the four elements actually, all of them, fire, water, air, and earth, to be holy, and they didn't want to defile them. So for them, interment of the body was an abomination. And for them, actually, what was an abomination for the Greeks was the best way a corpse could end up, that is, being devoured by the birds of prey, because that way none of the four elements would be defiled, and they call this sky burial. Because the birds eat your body and they fly, so you're basically buried in the sky. When somebody dies, the body is immediately taken over by institutions that are supposed to be in charge of compartmentalizing it, separating it from daily life, complete with makeup and make-believe, and actually the people around the dead person are not really supposed to deal with it. It is kind of institutionally separated. Whereas in other cultures, death, in the death ritual, the phenomenon of death is actually very much close to contact. It can be touched. It is very, very much alive. Michel Foucault, the famous post-structural philosopher, went to Iran during the rites of Ashura, which involves massive crowds of young people in the streets, beating their chest or engaging in self-flagellation. And he was completely floored by the magnificence of these events. The fact that so many people could come together, sing, and engage in harmonized movements together, and feel such a unity and and fraternity in the process of this public mourning. It can't help but be cathartic. And if you witness such events, you will know the power that they exert on the individual that almost sweep you off your feet. One cannot really judge or evaluate these different cultures that are more or less apples and oranges. But I would say one thing, that stoicism that we find in today's American and Western bourgeois cultures, it could work if it did have a root, a religious and mythic connection to the deep roots of this culture. Stoicism makes sense if you believe in it, if it has religious depth for you. But as etiquette, as a form of kind of social politeness, it can't help but be very difficult. And in this sense, I think the American and Western artists have almost a responsibility to bring the experience of death in a social way to the consciousness of the people and allow them to contemplate it, because in their funerary processes, this is denied them. So I think what you have done and what artists such as you before you have attempted, and Beckett is a very good example. I think they perform a function in the Western culture because they deal with the question of death, and this is sorely missing in the funerary processes. So definitely there is a place for this kind of collective contemplation of the trauma of death.